I know on the streams of the actual Fate remaster we did over on Twitch and the Let's Play channel, I said that I probably would not do a full review on Fate Reawakening until I covered all 4 games on stream, and that still holds true. Though, with some of the discussions popping up around this functional but half-baked remaster, I felt it worthwhile to address some of the elephants in the room, albeit in more of a first impression style format, since I've only spent about 11 hours in the remaster at this point. Now, for clarity, I did get a press key for the remaster due to my history with action RPGs on the channel, as well as the review of the original Fate game itself. Though that is where the relationship with Fate ends for me, much less the game's current publisher, Gamigo. Simply put, I played the Wild Tangent version of Fate at a friend's place while I was in university, but never owned it myself back in the day because I was already much more of a Diablo fan, so most of my playtime with it was actually much later, with a good chunk of that being preparation for the review back in 2022. So the nostalgia beast for it is just not there for me either. That said, as talked about in the original review, Fate is still a solid game if you know what you're getting into. It's basically a mystery dungeon style game with action RPG mechanics and a flexible character development system that is a lot more freeform than most RPGs due to its classless systems where you can invest in whatever you want. This is true both for the original game and for the remaster. It does tend to have a bit more of an aimless feeling thanks to it leaning heavily into that mystery dungeon procedural generation, this meaning that levels will feel more random and there won't be proper story or history to each of the floors, instead focusing on the chaotic dungeon delving, loot hunting, generic quest, and ultimately boss hunting style of gameplay. The big issue with the original is that it can be hit or miss as to how well it runs on modern systems, with some people running it just fine with their setups, while others can have a frame rate issue, glitches, etc. that require support programs like DG Voodoo as a wrapper, or even fan-made patches or mods to get it running stable, especially with the Steam version. Getting it instead on a platform like GOG, where they will often bake in these fixes, can help a decent bit with that, but only so far, since both hardware and software have changed drastically over the past 20 years since its release. This remaster, though, makes it so that those are, at least temporarily, less of an issue, and it also introduces something that the original Fate did not do natively, namely controller support. Is this controller support good? Not really, but it is serviceable and playable to the point where I don't hate playing it on controller. It's just much easier for me to play it with mouse and keyboard. Some of the UI changes to support the controller do also limit what you, as a player, can do too. So the complaints there are valid, even if they are a bit overstated. The main issue with the controller, or even mouse and keyboard support, is the lack of rebindable controls, and the reduction in gameplay options overall whenever it comes to the moment-to-moment play. Simply put, you can do about 90% of what you could do in the original, and you have less variety in your UI, and you can not change any of this, at least until modders get their hands on the game, at which point you might as well be playing the original, since it'll be about the same amount of work to get it where you want it to be. Similar situations crop up as we look at the various bugs and oddities in the game, which in some instances are minor cosmetic nonsense like enemy weapons scaling, breaking as you go past 30-ish floors, outpacing the enemy sizes to comedic effect. There's also some audio oddities, especially when switching between the 4 games, where your audio settings can break or even be forgotten. But they also spread into more moderate or even severe bugs, such as the town portal books not functioning properly and eating up a large number of your scrolls, or impossible quest generating because the townsfolk will generate quests one level too low at times, with more major bugs being an overflow on pet health when you heal them, dropping them to near zero quantities of life. There's even some bugs with the enemy hitboxes being wonky and AI that absolutely do need some fixing to improve the difficulty and enjoyability of the game, even though they don't make it impossible to progress. Though I could see the enemies spawning in walls being frustrating, I never encountered one that made progression impossible, since you could just cancel the generic quest and move down the stairs while grabbing a new quest. There's also just some missing functionality like I hinted to earlier compared to the original. A lot of pet interactions are gone outside of basic equipment, selling, and transforming abilities, just for examples. And there are a number of quirks with the clicking on things that are hindered by oversized or undersized hitboxes, sometimes resulting in impossible to gain treasure. It also feels at least a bit like some of the level scaling and gear scaling is off, but that's more of a gut feeling at this point rather than something I've sat down to math out compared to my earlier playthrough a few years ago. The last major functionality change, unless I've gotten extremely unlucky, is that the randomization of the boss floor has changed, or more likely disappeared. So while the game can still technically go down over 2 million floors, the boss room seems fixed on floor 40 now, rather than variable within the sub 60 range. Or I was just unlucky and got level 40 bosses 3 times in a row, which is possible, but unlikely. Graphically speaking, while the remaster does have some of the budget remaster smeariness to it, overall it does still look better in a lot of locations. But it is kind of a 2005 game with 2012 textures effect, so it's not going to be something that shatters expectations visually. And on the audio side of things, well, the original game obeyed my settings better, so I'd give the classic a win over there over the remaster, even though the game is otherwise the same in that department, or at least feels that way. Overall, the game is still fun, and if you're wanting a version of Fate that just works, comes with all 4 games, then Fate Reawakened may be just for you to relive a pinch of nostalgia and explore one of the formative games of the action RPG history. It will miss some points from the original, but it does just work. If you're looking for a more detailed and accurate experience, then I would still get the bundle off of GOG and hope that it works on your system smoothly, which it should with the second game especially in the series getting active GOG preservation support going forward. Either experience can be gotten in the $20 to $25 range for all 4 games, especially if you wait for a sale, with the old ones sometimes going even cheaper, with mine coming to a grand total of $12 because I waited for sales for them. Now, I'll toss links to both the remaster and the originals down below so you can decide what fits your needs more, at least if the game itself interests you. And for a more in-depth dive on just the game itself rather than the remaster's quality, there should be a link on screen now to the review from a few years back, and I will likely be streaming the rest of the remaster between games over on Twitch as well as probably the side channel too.